Hello and welcome to ConTinual. My name is Jean Marie Ward, and tonight we're talking about private eyes, gumshoes, and the tropes that make them so special. And we've got a great group of panelists and writers who, all of whom use mystery in their work in one form or another, to talk about their favorite PIs, gumshoes, detectives, and all of the aspects that they love and don't love about this subgenre. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, starting with Frank.
Hi, my name is Frank W. Butterfield, and I'm the author of 95 novels, mysteries, and some romances, but mostly mysteries, about half of which are historical, and there's a whole handful that are contemporary. And I'm really glad to be here. Thank you all so much for having me.
Great. Hansi.
Hi, I'm Hansi Oppenheimer. I run Squee Projects, and this is awesome to be here. I make documentaries, and I'm a huge film geek, so talking about noir is right up my alley.
Great. John?
Yeah, I'm John Al French. I'm a retired crime scene investigator from the Baltimore City Police Department. I'm also a writer. The first story I ever had published was a PI story featuring not an ex-cop, but a former crime scene investigator.
Something of which you know nothing, right?
Right. I never did. I just made it up as I went along, and the detectives were all.
They were impressed. Yes. Kat.
Hi, I'm Kat Richardson. I used to write urban fantasy novels. They were about a PI in Seattle who worked for Ghosts and Monsters. The Greywalker series, there were 9, and closed that out in 2014. Then I wrote a science fiction police procedural that came out in 2018. It's called Blood Orbit, came out from Pyre. It's in limbo now because of some issues with Pyre, but it did win the Endeavor Award, Best Science Fiction Novel by a Pacific Northwest author. Right now, I'm actually kind of struggling back into publishing, and so I'm working as an editor right now, and my specialization is genre with any kind of mystery or crossing genres sort of business going on.
Cool. Very cool. Russ.
Hey everyone, I'm Russ Colchamiro. I'm a member of Crazy 8 Press. I write science fiction, mystery, and some horror. Lately, I've been working on my Angela Hardwick sci-fi mysteries. She is an intergalactic private eye where she gets into all sorts of misadventures. To me, she's part Doctor Who, part Blade Runner, and part Atomic Blonde. The first 3 novels in the series, Fractured Lives, Crackle and Fire, Fractured Lives, and Hot Ash, are all already available. And the 4th book, Blunt Force Rising, which I just announced, will be out in September. And also, for those who don't know, I also have a podcast which I interview a bunch of you folks. John's been on the show and Gail's been on the show, and hopefully I'll get some of you guys as well, which will be on Wednesday nights. And in fact, I will be on tomorrow night.
Okay, cool.
Although this is going to be delayed 2 weeks, right?
It usually is about 2 weeks or a little bit longer.
Well, so not tomorrow night, but anyway, you can go find my episode.
It'll be past. We're doing time travel, right? That's what the issue is. Okay, great. Gini.
Hi, I'm Gini Koch. I write the Alien Catherine Kitty Cat series for Doll Books. I also write under a variety of other pen names and in all lengths and genre, including mystery. And most importantly for this panel, I write the Necropolis Enforcement Files series, which features an undercover detective who's also an undercover werewolf, solving crimes across the planes of existence.
Okay, cool. What draws you to the PI detective noir, that whole thing of the detective? What draws you to it, and what's your favorite trope of this particular element of the larger mystery genre? Gini?
Oh, me.
Yeah.
I was not prepared.
I do that a lot.
Mysteries are my first love, from a reading standpoint. You know, once I got out of kids' books, which I did very early, even though I kept reading them. But I was reading the complete Sherlock Holmes at 7, and I love everything mystery. Everything I write has a mystery of some kind in it. Either it's very small or very big, but all my characters always have to figure something out in order to save the day and keep people alive and so forth. Having mentioned it, probably my favorite PI or consulting detective is Sherlock Holmes. I love him not only because really he's the real first. You can throw out a few, but really he's the guy that made it into the subgenre that it is. And I'm trying desperately to think of a trope that's my favorite because I love almost all of them. I can come up, and I know you'll ask this later, with the one I don't like the most. But for the most part, I love there's I just love mysteries.
A couple. I'm good.
Yeah, I'll take them all. Give me all the tropes and I'll figure out a way to mash them up together and make something fun.
Okay, great. Frank, most of your mysteries are, most of your work is in historical mystery. And
Right.
so, what drew you to the detective, and what's the trope that keeps you coming back for more as a writer or as a reader?
Well, my favorite detective is Lord Peter Wimsey, who is not noir at all. In fact, the noir writers really didn't like Dorothy Sayers much at all because she was too fancy schmancy and wrote too many words. But
They
I
must
do
have hated
love
Raymond Chandler.
Oh, Chandler's
Something
his
like
own
that.
story.
Yes. But I'm sorry, I just couldn't resist.
They get paid by the word, a lot of those people, so you might want to make it really wordy.
But Frank, please go on. I'm sorry.
No. No, in fact, Sayers talks about that in one of her books where her detective is at a cocktail party with writers, and they're kind of talking about how the kids these days, circa 1936, just want everything really, really fast. They want action, action, action because they're watching movies, and that's what they're basing their reading on. So that's and that's leading up to Chandler, or McCain. Anyway, James N. Cain, maybe. So the bottom line, though, is that's my first love was Lord Peter Wimsey. I did read Hercule Poirot. I read the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, when somebody would let me actually read Nancy Drew, because I loved Nancy Drew much better than the Hardy Boys.
She had better
Um,
mysteries.
Better,
Yes.
for sure.
She did have better mysteries, and also there wasn't that stupid Chet. I hated Chet. He just really drove me nuts. But Lord Peter Wimsey was the one that really landed for me. And so my first book was actually a private investigator who was wealthy, kind of Lord Peter stuff, but not really flaunting it at all. And at first, I found myself writing like Sayers, and I couldn't figure that out. I was into the second book before I could figure out why. Occasionally, Nick, who was my main character, would start talking fancy. And then I realized he was born on Nob Hill and he was raised that way, but then he tried to get away from all of it. And as his father later says, he sounds like Sam Spade when he talks. Because Maltese Falcon was like the movie that he loved the most when he was a kid that, he saw. And anyway, so the trope that I like the most goes along with the way Nick is. I like the outsider private detective, and that there's a lot of different little subgenres of that, like the insurance investigator, like Kinsey Milhone, or the arson investigator, or the investigator who's on the outs and that the cops really are pissed off at and don't want to help and don't want anything to do with, which is my character sort of goes in and out of that because he's openly gay in 1953. And so I like the private eye as an outsider, and the private eye who also kind of is always having a nervous breakdown, or it basically is impacted by what's happening and doesn't just roll from one action sequence to the next and just basically, gets a sip of water or takes a shot of brandy and then goes on to the next thing and then tumbles down a hill but never breaks any bones. I like it when the private investigator is somebody who really is being impacted by the work he's doing. Mm-hmm. Both emotionally and physically, because it's very real. And I know that's really not a trope, but there are books that are like that. There are writers who do that, and I really like those.
Okay, cool. Hansi, again, your favorite PI, detective, etc. and the trope or tropes that makes them special and what you keep coming back to.
Well, I love the trope of like the lone wolf. That's always intriguing to me. And I also like how the PI are generally like honorable people. You know, even if they're doing sleazy stuff, they're basically trying to do it for the right reason. And I think my favorite private dick is Burke.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Burke?
Andrew Vax.
Yeah.
Burke's more of a criminal than a private investigator, but he does act as a private investigator.
And he helps out all the people on the street who couldn't afford to have, you know, vengeance for, you know, the crimes they've been victims of. And he takes care.
Is this a novel series or a movie series?
There was about 16, 17 Burke novels.
Yeah.
By whom?
Andrew Vax.
Andrew Vax.
Oh, okay.
VACHS?
VACHSS.
SS.
Yeah, he's amazing. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, Lone Wolf.
All
right.
It kind of goes beyond hard boiled. If there's a word for something that's hard boiled, this is it.
But like you said, mentioned James M. Cain, and again, I'm a huge fan of his stuff, and I think Andrew Vax's stuff is kind of similar in that gritty.
Okay, cool.
Dick.
For some reason, in my head, I hear Burke's Law, and I'm not sure that's the title.
Well, that's what I was thinking too when I heard that.
Well, Andrew Vax was a lawyer. So, and there is Vale's Visit that he wrote together with Joe Lansdale.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. John, what about you? The detective that really rings your chimes, the tropes that do the same.
My first exposure to detective stories was in high school, and it was Sherlock Holmes, The Adventure of the Speckled Band. Later on, I started reading Hercule Poirot, and then in college, I took a mini-master course on private eyes and private eye fiction, and I learned about them all. And there are a lot. I'd have to say my favorite is Raymond Chandler and Philip Marlowe, because he sort of epitomized what we see as private eye. He's got, my favorite trope is the attitude, where he has a simile for every occasion. He has a wisecrack for everybody that's bothering him. He's dogged, he's determined, he's honorable. What was that Chandler said? Down these mean streets a man must go who is not himself mean, who is neither tarnished nor afraid. And that's Marlowe. You hire him, and the only way of getting him out, the only way of calling him off is to kill him. And so far, I don't know, the movie that's coming out might just do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's been played by a whole bunch of great actors too, which does hurt. You know, he's got this great public image from all the iterations in film.
There was an HBO. The one thing that really made me want to get HBO, but I never did at the time, was the Philip Marlowe, Powers Booth doing the Philip Marlowe, and that was, to me, he is Philip Marlowe like Jeremy Brett was Sherlock Holmes. Mm. There's of course Bogart, and my favorite Philip Marlowe movie is the one with James Gardner in it, and it's just called Marlowe.
Yeah,
and I mean that's that again. I think he went from there into Rockford Files, playing basically the same character. But Philip Marlowe is I've got a lot of favorites, but Philip Marlowe is the top for me. He is the epitome of that kind of PI.
And the trope is
just the attitude. The smart talking,
smart ass,
the smart ass PI who's not intimidated by anything.
Yeah, who says that when he's beaten up that I must be getting close. People are hitting on me.
Yeah, there was a great line in I don't think it's in the books, but in the James Gardner Marlowe, He is being beaten up, and in a pause between hits, he looks at one guy and goes, "Does your mother know?"
What you do. James Garner asks that at least once in every role. He asked it in Maverick. He asked it in Support Your Local Sheriff and Support Your Local Gunfighter and in Rockford.
It's a good line.
It's a great line. It's a great line, and he could deliver
Jim Garner
it.
kind of line.
Yes. Anyway, Kat, who's your ultimate PI, detective, gumshoe, and what's the trope that really, or tropes?
There's so many great ones, and wow, I started reading mysteries when I was a little kid, you know, with Minute Mysteries and Encyclopedia Brown, and then things got weirder and weirder, and you know, Sayers and Christie and Gardner and John Creasy, and I mean, just huge. And somewhere, I'm not quite sure when, I fell into all of this stuff that we now think of as hard-boiled noir. And since that time, I have fallen in love with those guys, you know, starting really with Cornell Woolrich and James M. Cain. I've read every single Continental Op story in multiple versions ever written by Dashiell Hammett. In fact, I've read everything that Dashiell Hammett ever wrote that wasn't commercial ad copy, which he also wrote for a while. and then, you know, almost everything by Chandler. There's a few things that I haven't been able to dig up a reasonable copy of. And so those guys have kind of formed my archetype. And then there's later detectives who kind of come marching in, being wonderful. People like Harry Bosch by Michael Connelly. And, you know, John Connolly, totally different guy, Irish writer. For some reason, I'm forgetting his detective's name. Wow, there's so many great ones. But I have to admit that to a certain degree, the Continental Op is always going to, you know, Dashiell Hammett's Continental Op is always going to have a warm place in my heart because he's a short, fat, unattractive, verging toward middle-aged guy who is just so damn dogged. It doesn't matter how awful the case is, he's going to chase it down, even when it's impractical, even when it's stupid. And he's not always the nicest guy. He's not always above board. Every once in a while, he kind of skirts around truth and legality because he works for an agency, which we all know is the Pinkerton Agency, in spite of what he calls it.
That's to me now.
Well,
The Pinkertons, I think it was cool, and then I found out the Pinkertons were
Oh my God, it's horrible.
Strike breakers, yeah. And precipitated massacres at mines, yes.
I actually borrowed the basic plot from Red Harvest for one of the Grey Walker novels, and when I was pitching it, I said, yeah, it's sort of Red Harvest with ghosts, and everyone's like, yeah, that's great. And later on, almost everyone I was working with came back to me and said, you know, I've never actually read that book. I'm like, you really should.
Yeah.
Hey, did they see you? Had they seen Yojimbo?
Yeah, it's like they're Yojimbo, last name
Fistful of Dollars. Yeah.
It's been adapted so many times because it's just so classic. And that dogged, tarnished, kind of crooked, but essentially good guy is someone that I'm always trying to build. And when I built detectives, they always kind of come a little bit out of that tradition of, you know, maybe a little tarnished or maybe a little tired, maybe a little worn around the edges, but still essentially a good person, sometimes in spite of their own desires. It's like, I'd really like to be a bad guy, but I just can't make myself do that one bad thing. I'm working on a story now. It's actually sitting with John Hartness, and I keep hoping he'll take it, which is about a guy in 1934 Los Angeles, because I grew up in Los Angeles. And so it's a great opportunity to play with all that stuff that was happening in Los Angeles in that period. And he's very much in the same tradition. He's a magician, in point of fact, a wizard. He's a magic user. And he doesn't want anyone to know. He's got a lot of money, but he's in a very precarious position with a lot of things. And so he's trying to solve the problem of his own past. And that's something that I see a lot in all the tropes of science, not science fiction, but of noir mysteries that I love is the way the detective's past has an intersection or is impactful on the case that he's working on. Where something that they know or something that they didn't do or something bad that they did in the past comes back. And that's one of those tropes that I just kind of love, is how the detective is in some ways tangentially related to this existential dread that is attached.
As long as it's not someone being fridged, I'm all for it.
Oh yeah. Let's not do those. There's a lot of, bad tropes which have become worse over time.
Yeah. Well, when these things started, there was only one kind of detective, one kind of PI, one kind of gumshoe, with the exception of Nancy Drew. And even then, that's just two types of detectives. And that's, fortunately, I think we're shifting that a bit. But
Very
anyway,
much.
yeah,
We had the
Russ.
three trope. We had the rich dilettante, the Lord Peter Wimseys, and we had the consulting detective types, like Sherlock Holmes, and then you had these kind of down and dirty PIs, and then you had a few people around the edges, like Nick Charles, who had been with an agency, then became a private detective kind of by accident and against his will, but he's wealthy and silly and drinks a lot.
Yeah, I put him in with the dilettantes, even though he had the background, because yeah. Russ, what about you? Who's who's the detective, the PI? And you can repeat if it
yeah, there's so yes to all. I really, my first real attraction to the PIs, and like you guys, I love mystery fiction in all forms. I always have, ever since I was a kid. There's just something about kind of even going back to the classic, the raincoat with the collar turned up and the fedora pulled down, and it's always raining and someone's smoking a cigarette, even though I hate cigarettes, but that's a whole different thing.
Other lines across the screen.
Standing under the halo of the street lamp at night. I was always drawn to, to me, it was always Bogey,
Mm-hmm.
Once I got my first eyes on Humphrey Bogart doing it, I was hooked. I saw it when I was little. I didn't even really know what I was watching, and I knew it's something that I just couldn't get enough of. There's just something about, seeing people poke around when it's dark and it's foggy, and you just know it's inherently dangerous, and there's things you can't see. And I just kind of like the sense that, whatever it is, I don't know if it's we or us or me, drawn to sort of, what's around the corner, what's just on the other side of that door. You always just kind of, curiosity killed the cat kind of thing. And then certainly as I got a little older, I read some Nancy Drew and some Hardy Boys, but I was really into the Rockford Files. That was just me. It was just an age thing. I just kind of loved it. That kind of just, that ham dog kind of, he's always, a day away from not being able to make the rent. He lives in this crappy little, trailer with his car that barely starts. And it's funny. I've actually interviewed on my show. I've spoken to a bunch of private eyes, and what they've said is, if you want to get a sense of in fiction, who's the most realistic private eye, it's Jim Rockford. Like that's how private eyes like really are. It's not kind of, the sexier. I mean, there are, although I do know a guy, this is an interesting story. So I work in the real estate business. I have a friend of mine, and I was telling him that, I'm writing some private eye fiction. He's like, oh, I know a private eye. You should talk to him. I'm like, great. He said, okay. And I'll just call him Jim. I don't really remember what his name is. He goes, all right, Jim. He goes, Jim's going to call you at 3:07 p.m. He's standing behind a mailbox, ducked behind the corner. He's going to tell you where to go. I'm like, what is this? Is this real? Like, this is a real thing. And it turns out I couldn't talk to him because he was involved in some like super hush-hush corporate espionage case, like really working. And I never got a chance to connect with him. He was really doing like the in the shadows kind of real hush-hush stuff. But then, a little bit later for me, and what really hit me kind of where I live, and I've never been able to let go, is even though it's not technically a private eye, but really kind of was Deckard from, Blade Runner. That was a real, those are my two loves. And that's what I write now. It's science fiction and mystery fiction. And I love them both. And really, the idea of, Deckard is really just a private eye by any other name.
Oh yeah.
In reality, and I've certainly read the book. It's a slightly different character in the book, but the
or
movie,
which cut you watch.
yes,
Yeah.
but honestly, in any cut, because in the book, he's married and he's got a whole different situation kind of going on there. But I've seen all the different cuts of Blade Runner, and honestly, pick, it doesn't matter. I like them all. Even though people say, "Oh, I hate the voiceover." I don't.
Oh, I like the voiceover.
No, I know. I do too. If the purists say it's awful, it's horrible, I don't really care what they think. I like it, but I love the definitive version. There's kind of no version that I don't like. And then more recently, and it's sort of in the same vein, was the character of Miller from The Expanse, who is a real. He was a former cop, becomes a private eye, but he's caught up in this, intergalactic battle between Earth and Mars and the Belt. And he really is the classic. He's got the beat up face, and he's got the fedora, and he's always, getting his ass kicked. And, it doesn't matter if he even gets paid. He just got that. I just love the, when you're talking about tropes, I love the character who just says, I can't let this go. Even if I logically, even if I should, even it's better for me personally, it's safer for me, certainly, whatever it is, whether it's, the beauty who kind of slipped away from me, or it's the child who's gone missing, or it's someone's telling me something I don't believe, and I just can't. I know I should just move on and just chalk it up to one of them things, and I can't do it. And that they're going to, maybe they're going to solve the crime. Maybe they're not. But often it's kind of the, what do they say? It's the, it's the journey, not the destination. So much about, for me anyway. I don't know what you guys think. The resolution. Some resolutions pay off better than others, but it's sort of the doing. How are they asking questions? Are they, as John said, do they have the wisecrack remarks? Does nothing shake them? Often they kind of get their ass whooped, and one, from another. I always think of, Chinatown, obviously, what is, Jake is sort of, he's so cocky, right? He thinks he's above all this, and boy, does he really get, more than he's bargained for. And that's kind of what I like about it, is that, and that's kind of the way I write, is the cases tend to start off as something, they seem fairly innocuous, it's fairly simple. Someone stole a thing, or someone's gone missing, or someone shot the person, or whatever. Okay. It's kind of the way they maneuver, right? And how they, can they sniff out the lies? Because pretty much everyone's going to lie to them in one form or another. The various players have their own agendas, and you kind of never really quite know whose agenda is legit, and which ones, if anyone's working together, if they're double crossing him or triple crossing him, or if they really love him or if they really hate him. And just the fact that these characters are willing to put themselves through this psychological and emotional and physical, basically torture, to kind of get to the thing. It's that itch that has to be scratched. And they just have to scratch that itch, no matter where even if they end up, getting infected, they just have to scratch it anyway. And that's kind of what I love about those characters. They just can't let go.
So you're saying that a PI, or a literary PI, a literary detective, has more commitment in fiction, if not necessarily in real life, more commitment than those who are salaried to do something. It's become personal.
Yeah, whether it's more or less, I don't know how you really judge that kind of thing, but just that sense of whatever it is, I have to know. I just have to know whatever the thing is, whoever the killer is, the thief, whoever that is. I can't sleep if I don't figure this out. I just can't live with myself. And maybe they can't live with themselves if they do figure it out, but they'll work. That's tomorrow's problem.
Yeah, that's sort of this is where noir edges into horror, is that you're permanently damaged by whatever you found out.
That's right. Right.
So yeah, folks are having a little technical difficulties.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, Ginny. I just can't see you.
Yeah, I have to crash a computer to get back to where you can see me.
Okay.
So I do not know what's going on with it.
Well, this is turning to be a much more exciting panel than anybody planned.
We are experiencing technical difficulties. Please keep your hands and arms inside the panel until the panel has come to a full
This is a dark
Complete
ride.
Yes.
This is a dark ride. It's a very dark ride. That's the thing that I think is strange is so many of these things come out of this noir tradition. And just recently, as an editor, I'm seeing stuff come in that is like crossing over the line into horror and really, where that magical mix comes in and it just gets gruesome. Even some of the modern noir stuff that, neo-noir goes in some really, really dark directions now that you didn't see as much until fairly recently. They weren't as common. They happened. You just didn't.
The thing about noir, though, is out of the past, where does Kathy shoot Jeff? Did you notice where the gun was pointed?
I
Right
didn't.
in the groin.
Yeah, I didn't actually pay any attention. Yeah.
So there has always been, and not necessarily with, not necessarily with, say, Chandler or even Hammett, who was a bit of a son of a bitch. But there is the darkness was there, and I think that
the way it's presented now, and since I'm working with cross-genre writers a lot, what I'm seeing is like these hybrids, which are sort of like pixie punk and urban fantasy, except they go really hard on the horror element. And a lot more exposed sex. I mean, there was always a lot of sexual content because noir comes out of, well, what we think of as noir comes from the pulp tradition, where initially there was no difference in a magazine that would have like strange tales or weird tales. Used to have science fiction, fantasy, horror, and mystery all in the same volume.
Some of them did, but there were like, for instance, in Dime Detective, Detective Fiction Weekly, Black Mask, would seldom find any kind of cross-genre work. It was all detective or noir or something like that. Whereas if something says has detective in the title, like Spicy Detective,
and
they were detective stories.
Yeah,
if
they
had the word mystery in it, then you would have the horror elements as well.
There was also a lot of what we now think of as romance in the True Confessions stuff, and that would sneak in some that wasn't as common, but you did see it upon occasion. And what they used to call kitchen sinkers, domestic thrillers that kind of arise out of that pulp tradition.
Yeah, there's a pulp hero, the Domino Lady, who was one of the more genteel vigilantes. She would mostly, her shtick was helping friends who were being blackmailed, and she would dress as the Domino Lady in a diaphanous gown and a small domino mask, and she would break into safes and steal the incriminating evidence and leave a little card, compliments of the Domino Lady. And that was about it. Lars Anderson got like 5 good stories out of that. And in those 5 stories, she only fired a gun twice. And once she hit the guy in the leg, and once it was an accidental discharge. So she wasn't what you'd call hard-boiled, but that was in one of the romance magazines.
Yeah, they used to be a little bit softer transition between some of the genres. They used to bleed together a little bit more here.
But as far as the cross genre, back in the days when there were a lot of bookstores, they needed to know where to put the book.
Oh yeah, that's really.
If you had a horror, if you had a Philip Marlowe type character going up against a monster, well, it's a detective and a monster story. We can't use this. We don't know where to put it. And then people like C.J. Henderson started writing I remember he had two crime series. One was Jack Hagee, your typical hard-boiled private eye that nobody could stop. And then the other one was Teddy London, who starts out as a private eye. And then the monsters start coming. And he was one of the first ones that actually, to do a cross genre with monsters and, using the private eye format to write monster stories. I won't say horror, but they were more monsters.
What happened with Kolchak? Was it the book first or the show first?
There was a Kolchak. I know this because CJ used to write Kolchak. There was a novel first.
Jeff Rice.
And it did not get a lot of play, but then it became the movie, the two TV movies.
Night Stalker.
And Night Stalker and the other. Russ, can you help me out? What was the other one?
Night Strangler.
Night Strangler.
Right.
And then they turned it into the TV series
for a season.
And then I think it was Moonstone who got the license to do Kolchak stories. And then the guy who had the license said, if anybody's going to do a Kolchak novel, it's going to be C.J. Henderson because he's the only one who understands the character. And then,
what did Jeff Rice have to do with it?
Pardon?
What did Jeff Rice have to do with it?
He may have written a novel.
Actually, and James Aquilone just won the Stoker for best, what was it, graphic novel for his Kolchak collection.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay.
But Kolchak he's that subgenre of private investigator who is basically the newspaper reporter.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but he's also
there's been a lot of them.
He's also committed to finding out. Like, he really does care.
He's like the original Mulder.
Yeah,
I
totally.
mean,
Absolutely.
yeah, the newspaper reporter is like, was it you, Russ, who said, "I've got to know"?
Yep.
He's gonna his editor may tell him to drop the story, but he's committed to the truth. So he's going to keep looking. He's going to keep looking until he gets the story.
Yeah, actually, I actually did an hour on Kolchak on my show, about 6 months ago. It was great.
Well, Kolchak is evergreen. Frank, we've been talking about pulps, and I'll get to you in a sec, Ginny. And since you are writing historical detectives, what kind of interface do they have with the pulps and the tropes that we've been talking about here?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. In the books that I'm writing, it's funny because I really at the very beginning tried very much to make it as pulpy as I could. And to keep it moving really fast, not a lot of insight. And then the characters just got too smart and I couldn't do that anymore. So they kind of took over and led me down like a lot more of a stringing things out and becoming more emotionally involved and less like action. But are we talking about tropes we don't like yet?
Not yet.
Okay, well, I have something I really have to get off my chest about that. The more y'all have been talking, the more I realize there's something I'd discovered that I'd forgotten that I knew. So anyway, I don't think I answered your question very well.
Well, that's okay. No, I was just curious if, the pulps had informed you or if it was something that you were focused more on the PIs, the gentleman detectives that you found in books, or did you draw on some of these darker traditions that show up in the pulps or the cross-genre traditions that Kat was mentioning and Hansi was mentioning about, the kitchen sink dramas that kind of edge into the weird?
Yeah, so there's a lot of kitchen sink stuff in my books, actually, because although the characters are they are private detectives first and foremost, and that's what they do, and they actually build a huge business around that it turns out to be this gigantic company. But at the end of the day, it's always kitchen sink stuff. There's a lot of, I would rather have the emotional aspect of what's happening in the story than even the facts, which kind of ties into the trope I don't like that I want to talk about.
Okay.
but anyway, so there's a lot of cross genre, but there's another thing that in my contemporary stuff, I have a heavy amount of metaphysics that some would consider to be fantasy, but I don't. And which is an interesting little push and pull of like, I need to be able to write about something that people will buy, like they'll buy the idea. But I'm like, actually, I've directly experienced some of these things that I'm writing about that sound like fantasy. So that's been a very interesting push and pull. And the book I'm writing literally right at this moment actually has kind of a crossover from what could be fantasy. And I had to kind of pull back a little bit from the way I wanted to directly express it and turn it more to like, was it a dream or was it real? I don't really know, but it really like was a motivating factor to get these other things done. So there's a bit of cross genre there that you would have a hard time deciding, is this fantasy or is this mystery?
Mm-hmm. And Hansi, were there any particular pulps that, influenced you in, the things that you do and the things that you love?
Sure. I mean, making a documentary about Joe Lansdale, like Hap and Leonard are like PIs. I mean, they're, without the distinction, but they're basically, the guys who go out, so, yeah, I mean, I have like every edition of Double Indemnity I can find, like ones from the 30s and 40s. I love all that stuff. It's just, and David Goodis, yeah, I mean, there's so many good ones, so many great, the pulp writers, and there's so many writers now that grew up on the pulp writers that have added their own touch to it, like Joe Lansdale has with Hap and Leonard, that I think is really interesting.
Yeah, okay. And Gini, since we've been talking about pulps and their influence on the darkest side of noir that Kat was talking about, the way it eases into horror when people are smoking at each other. To quote a critic's comment about Out of the Past, have you been influenced in particular by any pulp writers from the grand old days of, True Detective and Strange Mystery and Weird Tales, or, in your writing, and, is there anything that you feel that should be brought up about those sorts of things before we go on to the tropes we don't like?
Right, that we're all waiting for patiently. I think you're influenced by everything you see and everything you read, everything you experience, good or bad. I mean, if you loved it, then you might want to imitate it. If you hate it, you want to make sure you don't do it. And because I was voraciously reading everything in mystery that I could get my hands on, yeah, absolutely. I was reading old stuff, and stuff that is now super old, but was very new when I was little, right? And so forth. And the librarian in the town I grew up in, the main library, after I'd read through everything in mystery, and I'm standing there at 12 years old demanding the next Nero Wolfe. And they're like, it just came out last week. You checked it out? I'm like, and I'm done with it. Here is the next one. I am just super, super relieved that I did not know I could have written a Rex Stout, because that would not have gone well. I still, to his dying day, with that horrible child, he wrote demanding his next book. And so they took me by the hand and walked me over to the horror section and said, here, read this, right? And I still have no idea if it was because they thought you're reading at an adult level,
or just you're weird, go away.
Right? Oh, it was definitely go away. It was definitely, here is 4 gigantic shelves of books. Read through these, child, before you come back to the desk. And I don't know if it was just to shut me up or if it was like, and you have nightmares. But so for me, they're kind of linked, because I can remember there's a mystery story. I don't remember who wrote it. It was in it was in a Year's Best in another collection. It's basically about a couple who are honeymooning with a friend, a male friend, and they recommend it because it gives you somebody else, and he lets them go off and blah, blah, blah. And they are playing, and he knocks a pebble off a ledge, and there's a mother cat playing with her kitten, and the pebble falls on the kitten's head and he kills it. And he's horrified. The guy who does it is horrified. It wasn't intentional. right? He's trying to play with him, like, look, you won't know what's coming. And ultimately, they're somewhere in, where there's a guillotine, not a guillotine, an Iron Maiden. And he insists on, oh, I'm going to stand in it because it's so cool, and, blah, blah, blah. And the mother cat comes and he's killed. He's impaled. She gets her revenge. That was a horror mystery combo, and that stuck with me. So yeah, they're all there. Like I said, I don't remember the writer. I'm sure it was a big name that I'm possibly know personally now, and I'm embarrassed that I don't remember who wrote it. But I was a kid. I didn't remember who wrote anything, right? So yeah, they're all influenced. If I was going to pick one from the pulps, and because of my technical difficulties, I don't know if this is mentioned, but Mike Hammer was a very, my family loathed Mike Hammer. I had to sneak read those because that was, and I quote, crap. So to get the Mike Hammer, that real hard-boiled street thing, I had to sneak read those. So they kind of always stuck with me because, they were so verboten. There's nothing verboten about them now. I mean, it's just like, it would be like me, yeah, don't read it now. And you're just like, this is so tame. So tame. But in the time, it wasn't. And very, realistic and, all these terrible, terrible influence people. So for me, from the pulp side, it would be Mike Hammer. That was somewhat influential. But everything was influential. Nancy Drew.
Yeah. I'd like to mention one more. And this is the granddaddy of them all, over about 100 years old. The guy who created the hard-boiled private eye and the rogue cop, as long as we're going at, is a guy named Carol John Daly. He created the first hard-boiled private eye, Race Williams, who in his very first adventure went up against the Klan, single-handedly took out the Klan. He was, he was not beholden to anybody. He had a friendly cop, and then there was the cop who would love to see him fall, who took great delight the time that Race Williams was shot in the back. And parallel to that, he had the rogue cop, Satan Hall, who was not above walking into a nice nightclub, slapping the guy he was after and daring him to go for his gun. And
good old days.
Yeah, and I will admit that I was much inspired by Carol John Daly when I wrote my book, The Devil of Harvard City.
Okay,
because it's basically an homage to Satan Hall, although this guy has, there are consequences to what he does. Okay. But everybody, Mike Hammer, Hammett, Chandler, early Earl Stanley Gardner, all owe what they did to Carol John Daly, and he's not well known now because, unlike the others, he did not change with the time.
And he also didn't get any movies.
No, well, almost, but he did not change with the times. He was writing the same kind of story in the 1950s that he was in the 1920s, and people stopped by.
And you have to change with the times. And we, unfortunately, are getting close to the end of our time. So we want to get to the part that both Ginny and Frank have been chomping at the bit to talk about, the tropes they hate. Now, Ginny, you'll start it off. Frank, then we'll go with you, and we'll go around the room.
I kind of hate to. I'll use them, and we all use them. I am super tired of the PI who drowns himself in the bottle or drugs or whatever. I'm just super tired of that. I am tired of seeing that. I'm tired of trying to empathize with that. And I get it. I understand why it's there, and I understand why it is still empathetic, but I am tired of it. And then I'm also, in some ways, very tired of the femme fatale idea. Like, you can either be an angel or a fatal woman, or you're a murder victim, and that's it. I don't like that. I'm tired of it, I should say. I mean, You've got wonderful femme fatales in all over noir. I mean, it's peppered with them. And then you've got the perfect angels, right? But it really feels like if you're a woman who might have had sex with a man out of wedlock, you're a femme fatale or a murder victim. Period. You don't get to be anything else.
And Laura Bacall was kind of in between there.
Which one?
Laura Bacall was kind of in between.
Kind of. I think she fell for the most part under the femme fatale, but yeah, she got to, because she was Laura Bacall and Bogey's side piece. She gets to, actually have a more nuanced role. But yeah, I'm just tired of it. So, I mean, I think one of the things that got rid of a lot of that is that we let, women be detectives. Again, you can have female detectives who, and they might have actually, had sex, but a lot of them still, there's the trope of, well, she's an alcoholic.
Or she's addicted
can't
to
we have
her
a normal
work.
person? Yeah, can't we have a normal person doing this? Can't a normal person be deductive? Right. So and that leads me to my third. The only people that are good detective has something seriously wrong with them, like Monk. Okay, how about a normal person who's just actually aware and pays attention?
There's so many autistic now.
Yeah,
It's like
everybody's an autistic savant. It's like there aren't that many out there, realistically. So, and they're not all solving crimes. Most of them are just trying to make it through their day. So anyway,
or they went into IT, which explains a lot.
Right. Happily in IT, making money. So those are my three biggies.
Okay, well, I will agree with you. I will agree with you on them. However, I will double down on the first one about drowning your troubles in alcohol or drugs. That is why I cannot read anything Stephen King ever wrote, because he can't write any other character. Yeah. So, yes, I have a problem with that one. Frank?
Well, the ones I want to mention may be more about writing styles than really tropes, but I'm still going to say them because I've just got to get this off my chest. The first one is puzzle stories or things that are neatly wrapped up. One of my favorite stories tales I've ever heard, is when they were filming The Maltese Falcon. John Huston, who did the screenplay, was like, I don't fucking know how this story ends. I don't know who did it.
That was Raymond Chandler.
That was The Big Sleep.
The Big Sleep. What happened to Owen Thursby?
Yes, you're right. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I've got all this time I've had, because Dashiell Hammett, speaking of people who spend all their time in the bottle,
Yeah.
I always think of Dashiell Hammett because I'm like, he was drunk the entire time he wrote. I mean, he was, that he got anything finished is actually pretty amazing. Okay, I'm sorry. So thank you very much for that correction.
I'm sorry,
it's coming out of the gate on that one.
Oh God, William Faulkner wrote Chandler about that.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's what that was what I couldn't remember, because it was somebody in there. I was thinking maybe it was another kind of like somebody who was a wordsmith who goes in and fixes scripts, but no, you're right. It was Faulkner.
It was Faulkner who was writing with Leigh Brackett. They wrote alternate scenes.
And no one knew who did it or why, including the original author. Yeah.
Raymond Chandler like, said, what? I don't know.
I have no idea. It was like, I think his telegram back. Like, I don't know. So here's my second one, and this is I've been waiting to have a place where I could say this out loud. Ripped from the headlines. So I actually, in my contemporary series, do write ripped from the headlines. Like, one of my most recent novels was, I wrote it as soon as the hurricane that passed over us here had passed over, and I wrote it about the hurricane. Not a big deal. And I wrote, frankly, about the pandemic, that thing that happened, the recent unpleasantness. And I would never have noticed this if I wasn't a writer. If I hadn't written several novels and had been pulling out of things from actual history. Agatha Christie wrote the Murder on the Blue Train, or Murder on the Calais Coach, which became Murder on the Orient Express. They hadn't found the body yet when she wrote that book. And everybody would have known, everybody in the United States would have known that story was about the
Lindbergh
names.
Lindbergh.
Yeah, the Lindbergh baby. They would, but they hadn't found the baby yet. They didn't. There hadn't even been a trial when she wrote that book.
Mhm.
And when that came to me, I was like, this is really cold, because Anna Maura Lindbergh, and I'm not a big fan of her husband. That's a different story, but that she's like, all of her friends are reading this Agatha Christie book about her life, and it's fictionalized and all that stuff, but it's not that fictionalized. It's obviously her. That really, and that they hadn't even, we think of that like that was happened much later after the whole story was over. No, they hadn't even found the body yet. So anyway, that really pisses me off. So I actually wrote kind of a revenge story where I basically took that and actually took that and stretched it out using Death on the Nile, and wrote a story where the people that she framed Death on the Nile around were in this small town in upstate New York, and they kind of both went nuts because that book had affected their lives so much. The story set in 1967, so it's like several years after, 30 years after that novel came out. And they've gone, the two characters where he killed the first wife so that he can marry the second wife, and it was something they plotted beforehand. The same setup, where he goes absolutely nuts and she goes nuts, and they end up having like this whole breakdown thing where they're running actually an insane asylum, and they're crazier than any of the inmates. And because it really annoyed me, and it still makes me quite angry when I think about what she did, because it was like she didn't care that there were real, actual human beings connected to that story who would read the book. Anyway, so I just need to go. And I know that's not a trope necessarily, but ripped from the headlines, whether it's Law and Order or whoever is doing it, I think you have to have some idea of what you're actually doing and to see how it's going to impact the people who are still alive that it's about. Okay, thank you. I needed to get that off my chest for like 3 years. Thank you.
Well,
That's
there
all
goes
right.
Law and
That's all right.
Order and
Yeah.
Blue Bloods and
Hansi, okay, your turn at this. Tropes or things you have to get off your chest. The doctor is in, 5 cents. I always wanted to be Lucy. People said I
That
was.
says a lot about you, more than you probably should have confessed.
Don't let her hold the football.
No,
Right.
don't let me hold the football. Don't ever. Yes, Hansi.
So, I actually I don't have any problem with any of the tropes really, except for like fridging, that I find offensive, to have a woman die to make the male's character do something. That always annoys me. But I love the tropes, and I love how shows now use the tropes. Like there was an episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia called "The Janitor Always Mops Twice." They shot it in black and white. It's the credits are all in the style of film noir, and he's like, doing the gumshoe chat during the whole thing, and it's brilliant. And the Archer did a similar thing where when he was in a coma, he was suddenly right. So I think noir is so in our brains that like it's everywhere. It's in all media. I mean, I think you can play with the genre, but I think it's it already exists. I guess the trick is to learn what you can add to it.
Great. Okay. Well, John, what's the one you don't like?
Okay, in reference to, I think it was Gini who said something about the drinking and the drugging. Orange Block did it best with Matt Scudder. Doesn't have to be done anymore. He nailed it, and that's it. The thing I don't like kind of goes hand in hand with this is, I think it was mentioned earlier about the private eye who's always trying to eke out an existence, that, all his bills aren't paid. He's having personal problems. His life is a mess. I don't really like that. I probably wouldn't like that guy in real life. I want a reasonably successful private eye who knows, who's got a good client base, and who knows what they are doing. Because it could be nowadays, back in the 30s and the 40s, it was he. Now it's more likely to be that, you might as well say they, because you don't know if it's going to be a woman or a man, and God bless everybody for doing that. But I want to see somebody who is, I want to read about a reasonably successful private investigator who knows what they're doing. I mean,
Remington
somebody
Steele.
who's kind of eked out an existence probably isn't that great a private eye.
Right. I want to hire Remington Steele. I don't want to hire the loser down the corner. I want the Remington Steele agency. Yeah.
I want to hire James Garner.
Yeah.
Well, I'll take Pierce Brosnan off your hands. So I'll stick with Remington Steele. I love Brockford, but I'll stick with Remington Steele. I'll take Pierce.
Yes,
And,
both beautiful men with great senses of humor. Russ, what trope would you like to jettison from the detective noir gumshoe?
So candidly, for everyone's objections, I don't really have objections really with any of the tropes for the most part, because I think there's room for all of them. It's really, to me, it's always about the execution, not about the, whether they're successful, not successful, whether they're drinking or not, whatever. Because I know a lot of cops, and I've asked them, I said, and detectives, I said, well, how do you forget? How do you let go of those tough cases? And they all say the same thing. You don't. They have to live with this pain and this horror, and a lot of them find ways to anesthetize themselves because they just don't know how to deal with it. It's very tough stuff. So I don't have an issue with it, but if I'm not interested in a story where the main characteristic of the private eye is that they're an alcoholic or a drug addict, that I don't care about. If it has some part of their lives, it's fine. It just depends on how well you do it. But the one thing that really does, I never liked, and I certainly don't like now, is it's when the women are portrayed as being helpless. They're just, oh bogey, oh hero, oh save me, oh take me, right, exactly, save me, only you can make my life right, only you can save me, only you can put order to the world. That I really don't, because that's just that's an old played out from old Hollywood, and when it was really just the white men writing, the subservient role. I mean, I don't necessarily see a whole lot of it nowadays. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but that's a character really that I just have no appetite for. I mean, femme fatales, again, can be great if they're done well. If they're not, then no. One thing though, I wanted to go back just a second, because we were talking, just to go back on some of the pulpier stuff, and I forgot to mention it, and it's worth it for me anyway, is that I actually read I read a lot of comic books. I read a lot of comic books. I don't read them as much as now because I don't have the time, but it was Hellblazer and John Constantine who actually had his own, he's not technically a private eye, but he really is. And he's essentially, a private eye who goes and hunts down vampire. That's it. That's the one. And Garth Ennis was my favorite run. Whether it's
Garth,
right, whether it's King of the Vampires or the Devil or whatever demons he's going after. I mean, and really being a snarky son of a gun. He'll just slag off the devil and have a big grin on his face. That's the kind of stuff where, that's kind of, he's my guy. Like that's, if, I don't have a lot of interest in writing other characters. A lot of writers do, and it's great. I have nothing against it. It's just, I like mostly do my own stuff. But if I could ever write an existing character, John Constantine would be my guy. That's the one that I love, in the rain, in London, and he never makes he never really makes any money, but if you got a demon possession or something bad is going down, really dark and evil and creepy, he's not a friend. You would never want this guy as a friend, but he's the guy you call when a demon comes knocking on your door. He's the guy you want to answer.
Yeah, love John Constantine.
Absolutely. Sounds not sure that I want to be around him, though. He's sort of like Jessica Fletcher. Bad things happen in his vicinity. Really.
As one of the characters, one of his buddies said, it's like John goes, you're a rake at the gates of hell.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Anyway, Kat, what trope would you like to put paid to? The PI noir gumshoe genre.
It's not there's something I never want to see again. It's more that I am kind of tired of the disposable relationship. Mm-hmm. The lone wolf who's bed hopping regardless of their gender. After a while, I'm like, don't any of these people have decent relationships? Don't any of these people have family? They never seem to have a living parent. They only have ex-spouses, if they have those. They're, kind of hopping from one bed to another. They never have brothers or sisters, but as complications and murder victims. My husband, one day, we were watching Blue Bloods a million years ago when it was still good. And he said, I really would love to see the relationship between Danny and his wife, but inverted, with the woman as the detective and the guy as the nurse. And I'm like, wow, that's really evil. I started to work on a book like that, and it's been really hard. Partially because it's really hard to get information about how many male nurses there are in the world. But also right now, the world is not very friendly to cop mysteries. So I kind of shelved it. But yeah, I want to see some detectives with a more functional relationship.
That makes sense. Yeah. You would think that all of the bed hopping would interfere, because sooner or later they're going to wind up with a client.
The series, he's got like a long-term.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there are some.
Yeah,
there are several, but it's like one of the tropes of classic, noir is, the not tied down to any one male, female, dog, cat, or ferret. I don't know.
Well, Janet Ivanovich's Stephanie Plum has had that hamster through about 20 generations of hamsters.
Although I have to tell you, having written a character who had a significant pet, and at one point I said, there has to come a point at which we kill off this ferret. I love ferrets. And he said, they don't live forever. They only live about 5 years. And my editor quite seriously looked at me we were having lunch at the time, and she said, no. She says, you cannot kill off the ferret. The fans will fly.
No, you can't. Everything has to take place within the ferret's lifespan, or you're dead. Forget the ferret. You're dead.
Ever. Yeah,
I had to kill an animal.
Well, Nero Wolf never worried about what time it was, what era it was. It was just he and Archie never got old, so
Yeah,
they just sort of kept not aging through the decades.
Yeah, like Kenzie Milhone, who is, eternally, well, still sadly, locked in the 1980s, because that's when Grafton wrote her, and she decided she was just going to keep her there. And I think that was a decision a lot of people wouldn't have made. But I still really applaud it, because she solved so many problems. She went ahead and did something that a lot of us wish we could have had the all-fired cojones to do, and just say, this person is who they are regardless.
Okay, well, we have reached the end of our time together. It's been a very lively discussion, and those are always the best panels. But now we have to close up. So I'm going to ask everybody to mention any work you want to promote, and tell folks where they can find it, or, find you to do the work, and where they can find you on the web. Starting with you, Kat.
I'm at catrichardson.com. It's spelled just like you see it on the screen, KATRICHARDSN. SON, sorry. You can also find me on Facebook and under Kat Richardson Writer or Kat Richardson Author. Twitter handle is no vowels. It's Kat Richardson, because I couldn't buy a vowel that day. There's actually 2 other Kat Richardsons in the writing world, and so we occasionally fight for who's going to get the name. And of course, right now I don't have anything new out, but I do have a collection out through Falstaff Books called Through the Gray, which includes a bunch of my weird short and not so short stories. And like I said, I'm mostly editing at the moment while I'm waiting for something to actually get through the publication train. So
since we have a lot of writers in the audience, is there a contact for your editorial services?
Well, it's a page on my website on catrichardson.com, and the company is officially called Ravenstaff. So you can also look me up under Ravenstaff. You should be able to find it. But
Okay.
catrichdson.com is the place. Thanks.
Okay, great, great. All right, John, what about you? What's your most current work and where can folks find you on the web?
My most current work is The Wages of Sin, that's spelled S-Y-N, a collection of stories about he's not a private investigator. He basically hangs out at this bar called The Shadows, and people in trouble come to him when they have no place else to turn. Published by Bold Venture Press. And you can find that and my other books on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
And they can find you?
Basically I'm on Facebook.
Okay, great. Russ, what about you? What's the work you most want to promote? Where can folks find it? Where can they find you on the web?
So I think I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'm currently in the middle of an ongoing series featuring my hard-boiled private eye, Angela Hardwick. As I said, to me, she's sort of a part Blade Runner, part Doctor Who, part Atomic Blonde. The first 3 books in the series are out now: Crackle and Fire, Fractured Lives, and Hot Ash. They're all available through Crazy 8 Press and available on Amazon. And the 4th book, Blunt Force Rising, will be out in September. I'll be out on book tour starting in a couple weeks. I'll be out multiple shows. You can check out my podcast. I've got 2 more episodes of the summer, one tomorrow. Well, actually, by the time this airs, it'll be over. But I'll be back in the fall. I've got an entire lineup that'll take us through the end. And again, it's a mixture of science fiction, mystery, crime, and horror. I've got some good stuff coming up this season, and always looking for new guests. So take a look there. And I think I've got a book coming out next year. John, is Agatha coming? Is going to see the light of day sometime this century?
Agents of the Abyss.
Yes.
Okay. The second anthology is coming out this year. So you're looking at the anthology coming out in 2024.
Yeah, if you think of if Monsters and MI6 got together, and so they're monsters who are spies, and I've got a piece coming out next year, but Angela Hardwick is going on, and I start writing the 5th book in the series next month, and then after that kind of wraps up what I consider sort of like series 1 for Hardwick, and then I'm going to do another 5 after that.
And your website?
It's just russcolchamiro.com. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at AuthorDudeRuss, and I'm easy to find on Facebook.
Okay, great. Hansi.
Hi, I'm Hansi Oppenheimer, and my company is Squee Projects. It's SQUEE, projects like Squee. And my film was picked up by Troma Now, my Joe Lansdale documentary, so it's screening on Troma Now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's been a challenge. And I have my first essay coming out in an anthology on the boys this fall. And I just sent in the first draft of my second essay on Our Flag Means Death. So,
okay, cool.
And I'll be at
Dragon Con. And your website, Squee Projects?
Projects.com.
Great. Okay, Frank, what's the current book? Where can folks find you on the web?
My latest book is called The Vicious Vintner. It's in my Nick Williams series. It is an epic. It actually spans from 72 to 83. And everything you didn't know about Burgundy, you can find out. Anyway, I know more about wine.
I'm always up for wine, yes.
Yeah, well, there's a lot in this. And I made up some new wines, which was a lot of fun. This is a book that I'm pairing with my contemporary series. And I'm in the middle of writing the pair, which goes back to these same wineries, and there's a new mystery that will be out by the time this gets released. It's called Dancing in the Moonlight, and that's my contemporary series. You can find me at frankwbutterfield.com. I'm on Facebook, although I'm not really on the socials much at all, but I'm on Facebook, and I'm the only Frank W. Butterfield who's writing, so easy to find. And everything I do is on Amazon. Some is on Barnes & Noble and other places, but I'm slowly going wide right now, as a matter of fact.
Oh, very cool, very cool. So, Ginny, you get the second to the last word. What's the current work you'd like to promote? And where can folks find you on the web?
Okay, www.ginikoch.com. I'm all over Facebook and on it way too much. I have 3 fan pages and my own. Friend me everywhere. I'm on Twitter, Gini Koch. There is one other Gini Koch. You can easily mistake us because we like a lot of the same things, but she is super cool. We've actually now known each other for at least a decade. And so if you think it's me and you say something, she'll be super nice and tell you, no, no, no. I'm the one who's at least if not trilingual, and she's the one that writes. So she'll send you to the right place. I'm also on Pinterest, and new release coming up, Dragonesque, is coming from Zombie Needs Brain somewhere in the near term. But where you can see me, I'm at the start of a massive amount of cons. Yay! Who needs sleep? Who needs to be at home? I'll be at LibertyCon. Actually, by the time this airs, I'll be home from LibertyCon in Chattanooga. I'll be heading to San Diego Comic-Con in July. And one of my publishers is racing to have a couple new releases for me to have there. So if you're going to see me at Comic-Con, come find me. I believe my table is C103. Then I'll be in Indianapolis for Gen Con in August, and at Dragon Con, I don't remember a booth number, for in September, and then World Fantasy Con in Kansas City in October, and then in November I collapse.
Yeah, I would too. I would too at that point. Well, you can find us at ConTinual.com. Our YouTube channel is Continual Con, and our Facebook group is Continual. So thank you all for joining here, however you found us. And thank you for giving us great panel, folks. Have a good evening.
Thank you.